Hello everybody and welcome back to a new YouTube video of mine. Today we are going to be talking about a very interesting topic, which is why cheap cars don't work anymore. Now, this topic might seem a bit controversial or a bit misleading also, considering the sales which the likes of Maruti or even a Hyundai in their low cost portfolio actually have in a country like India. But this is more of a global topic as such which I have taken up, and there's still a broader theme, and this transition is seen even in a country like India, where the growing sales margins or the growing sales numbers are simply not seen, and the number of cars which are sold in that segment have been dropping and have been transitioning to a more premium segment, or at least to a higher weightage is now being given to SUVs as such. So let's get into some of the reasons behind why this change is taking place. Now, the first thing which I think is pretty evident and we all must have seen over the years is that simply cars are lasting longer. And this is evidenced by the fact that the average age of the cars on the road just keeps going up. I mean, till date you would see a Maruti 800 on the road. And that just shows the reliability, the usability factor, the convenience factor which cars now have. The fact is that all the cars which you own now, they do tend to last longer, and while they are more complicated and there can be exceptions in terms of some cars not being repaired on time or service issues, but the fact is generally cars do last longer and you can use them for a longer time. And this is backed by the fact that even companies themselves are having more lucrative service packages, not just for themselves, because that is where they get a lot of the profit margins, but also for consumers. Unlimited mileage, warranty packages, service packages, and this really entices customers to hold on to their cars for long. And in other cases, the fact is that consumers are buying multiple cars now, and that is also making sure that some older cars are still being kept and newer cars are being added on. And this is again leading us to a scenario where cheap cars are not necessarily the way to go for a new consumer as such. There are other options available, and this leads us to our second point, which is cars lasting longer also allows us to access a used car market which is much more stronger, which is much more reliable as such. And ultimately it is this used car market which is accessed by most of the consumers, as this is where you will see consumers actually going for a new car purchase, especially in countries like US and UK. The first car purchase often comes from the used car market, because that is where you will find reliable old horses as such, making sure that you can actually get a good value for money car at a very cheap price. And this is also happening in a country like India too, where you are often seeing entry-level cars from the previous era, or even semi-luxury cars actually now being available for very cheap prices, and consumers are going to get them, especially in the COVID era, where people are preferring to again own cars. And an easy entry point into this is to go for old cars, especially when due to the semiconductor shortage, you don't have newer cars available. And that again has caused cheap cars to not be the first choice as such for many of the consumers. And this is a trend which is going to only increase going forward. Now, other than that, there's one more point which needs to be considered, is that some of the features as such, some of the technology as such can now be retrofitted into their old cars. Like for example, to have an Android Auto or an Apple CarPlay system, you can just have it retrofitted into an old car. There are systems available in the market as such, in the off-market systems, not necessarily provided by an OEM company, but these can actually be fitted separately too, and this again really provides for a good access into the market and make sure that used cars are a reliable option as such for consumers. And this is backed by market research too, where especially in the last few years used car sales have skyrocketed and the valuations for these cars have also skyrocketed. So this is again a reason why consumers might prefer to actually not go for a cheap car and go for a used car instead. Now, this leads us into the third reason as such, which is about SUVs. SUVs have been the craze since the past 5 to 6 years, and this has been a global trend. Everywhere you see, whether it is UK, USA, India, China, SUVs are the thing now, and people are running mad after them. And this is showcased in the sales too, where a majority of the market share now comes from SUVs, or at least a growing market share, and that is where the growth potential is for many of these manufacturers. And the fact is that cheap cars are always small hatchbacks, and consumers simply don't want them anymore. So they will either prefer SUVs which are again used, or they will make sure that they are going for a new SUV, whether it is through outright payment or even through other financing options, which we'll get to later. And this has again allowed them to actually go for a car which they would want. SUVs have been an aspirational product, and that is why people are gunning for them and not going for hatchbacks as such, because people don't want them anymore. They are not the trend as such, and the used car market is again becoming strong, as I had mentioned previously. And that is why the SUV craze has also affected the demand for cheap cars as such. Now, this is again followed by some US specific reasons which also I would like to cover, especially the stimulus checks which are being given. The fact is that these stimulus checks are actually quite a lot for many of the people, and the fact is that you don't necessarily need to go around and buy a cheap new car. Rather, you can go ahead and actually save up and go for a decent mid-sized crossover or a hatchback, and this again allows for a respectable car which you would actually like to drive and own, rather than just going to buy a cheap new car which really would not have any use, would lack features, not have enough engine power, and would not be that refined as such. And this again causes a huge load of difference. And coming to our last point, this increased financing options. Now this is a topic which I talked about previously also, especially car leasing as such. But whether it is car loans, more and more loans are being offered for cars, whether it is EMIs or even leasing options or even subscription models. This has led to higher order cars, luxurious cars, techno-centric cars, basically higher price cars to be more accessible in the market. And this has allowed for more and more consumers to actually go for a more premium vehicle, and they would actually want to make sure that they do pay that premium too in their for that vehicle. And ultimately this is followed up by the case that they actually go for that vehicle rather than going for again cheap new car, which is really not the option which anyone would want to exercise nowadays. Not just on the fronts of pricing or the trend thing as such, but objectively looking at it, these cars simply do not work anymore in the current market situations, which is why even manufacturers these days, they do not focus a lot on these cheap cars, but rather they have oriented themselves to delivering quality new products, whether it is in the SUV segment or in the luxury car segment, or providing a decent mid-size sedan too. The fact is, you will not see many cheap new cars coming out. I mean, just look at the Indian car market. After the Maruti Suzuki Alto, a small update for that, and the Renault Kwid, you will not see any new cheap, like really cheap, bottom of the barrel car as such, which is being introduced into the market. And while there was a huge demand for these cars even today, the fact is that trend, that demand is going down, and people want at least an SUV styling, or even a crossover, or just a more premium product. People are becoming more aware. They want safer cars, they want better gizmos, and this has really caused an overall seismic shift in the market, and that is why cheap cars simply don't work anymore. So I hope that you guys did like this video and the insights which I have shared in this video. As always, do go ahead and like the video, subscribe to my channel, share this video with your friends. That will be really helpful, and I will see you guys next time. Thank you so much.